How you doing, Blake?
Doing good. It's great to see you guys.
Great to see you too. How are you doing? What's the latest with the company? And what did you announce this week?
Yes. So I guess first of all, we released our 911 response drone network.
Hmm.
We did that, man, maybe 8 months ago, something like that, which is really the product that I started Bring to build.
Yeah.
That was an important moment for me personally. But kind of what we design and manufacture are drone recharging pods that we install on top of police and fire station roofs.
Hmm.
And then we integrate that network with computer aided dispatch. So the second someone calls 911, we grab the GPS coordinate that's associated with that 911 call, and we can automatically launch a drone from the nearest recharging station to the emergency, send to that location at 60 miles an hour. When it arrives, we can deliver Narcan, EpiPens,
Wow.
personal flotation devices, all sorts of stuff, and also just provide first responders a lot of additional information about the situation they might be walking into. So our drones have thermal imagers. They can see hotspots and structure fires, communicate that to a fire department before they arrive. And then when they do arrive, help them point their hoses in the right
Mm.
direction. And then on sort of the policing side, we can, tell responding officers if someone is holding a lighter or a gun or anything like that before they even show up. So that was huge. And what we just released or announced a couple of days ago is our latest funding round. So a new 75 million led by Index Ventures, but with significant backing from Motorola Solutions, which
Amazing.
is actually kind of an interesting company. They have more or less a monopoly position in the body-worn radio market.
Hmm.
So they have pre-existing commercial relationships with just about every police and fire department in the free world. And they're going to start distributing our products and helping us sell into those logos. But we're also going to be integrating with their body-worn radios, so officers can basically request drone backup very easily.
That's awesome.
And they have a strong market position in a number of public safety software categories. So we'll be integrating with all of that too.
That's super cool. Can you take me through some of the history of the company? What was version one of the drone that you built? What was the first drone you built? Was it just kind of hacked together
you said
DJI
you said
stuff?
something that stood out, which is this was your original vision for the company, but you started it back in 2017,
Yeah.
and then there's been so many different areas in which drones have emerged and so much potential across a bunch of different categories. I imagine you had all this pressure to go in different directions over
Totally.
time. But yeah, would love to hear of how your thinking has
Yeah, the
evolved
evolution.
since the beginning, or was this like this was the idea from the beginning, and you're just like happy to finally, get to really focus and deliver on it?
I mean, I've loved aerospace technology since I was a little kid, right? If I had the choice when I was 16, I would have been designing full scale fighter jets, but or 12, whatever. But when I was that age, maybe I didn't quite have the resources to pull off like a full scale manned aircraft program, but I definitely did have the resources to build reasonably sophisticated drones. So I've been doing that ever since I was pretty small. But really, what got me thinking about public safety technology was the October 1 shooting. So I grew up in Las Vegas. I knew people that were along the strip when that was happening. And that's what got me thinking, like maybe there's a home for some of the technology that I love in the hands of first responders to help them save lives during critical incidents.
Wow.
So I went and I reached out to Vegas Metro SWAT, and surprisingly, they agreed to have lunch with like 18-year-old me at the time.
That's amazing.
And the beginning of that interaction, we talked a lot about what happened during October 1, and I learned things that I didn't realize. But then the conversation broadened to the rest of their jobs, the high risk warrant searches and barricades and hostage rescue missions that they have to face every day. And I walked away from that interaction thinking if they just had a way to get eyes and ears in dangerous places, that would be a life-saving capability for them regularly in the context of active shooter response, but also all of the other missions that I mentioned. And while I also conceptualized the idea of like a citywide 911 response drone network in that meeting, I was familiar with how technically complex it would be to pull something like that off from my time at DJI, because they were my prior employer before I started Brink. Just the levels of reliability and airspace deconfliction and optics and like many other things that you have to pull off in order to really make that work. It felt out of scope for me at the time. So I began with the indoor system. which is really like a purpose-built drone for SWAT teams to get eyes and ears in dangerous places. We invented the world's first drone glass breaker. So the drone can actually fly up to a window, shatter it out, make entry. Then it has a LiDAR on board. So as it's clearing rooms, it's drawing a floor plan of that structure and then streaming it back live to first responders. Has thermal imaging capabilities, 4K cameras, and also a two-way audio system. So when the drone finds someone, a crisis negotiator can actually use it like a flying cell phone to try to de-escalate the situation. And today, over 600 SWAT teams are actively using it, which is about 10 to 15% of the SWAT teams in the United States. And that success is really what enabled us to take on this like larger vision of automating a lot of 911 call response.
How do the teams test with the product? Do they have traditional sort of? I imagine they can go to ranges and do scenario planning and shoot houses, right?
Yeah, kill houses.
Are they going and using your tech at the same shoot houses and practicing, or do you build sort of digital systems that allow them to practice as well? What does that look like?
Both. Yeah, we have simulators. So if folks want to fire drones virtually, that's totally possible. But many of them do choose to train with the actual hardware. And I would say, like, when I was developing the first version of the Lemur, I actually rode along with Vegas Metro SWAT for like 6 months. So I went on 20, 30 SWAT call outs, and I watched them deploy the early versions of our drone. And more than in any other way, like, that's how the technology was actually developed. Like, me paying close attention to what worked and what didn't work. And if something didn't work, I would go back to my mom's house at the time and like re-engineer the product to the point where I thought it would do better on the next mission. And then when I would get a 3 a.m. notification, there's a barricade at this address in Vegas, I'd bring that version of the drone.
Can you talk about just how hard it is to deploy hardware in the field in these environments? We've talked about a company called Sonos that I'm sure you've interacted with at different points. We bring this up sometimes because it's like, they're in these like highly controlled environments, which is just your home, and they connect to your local internet, and you just like want them to be able to you want to be able to hit play and just like have it play music, yet 20% of the time it doesn't play. And I bring that up as an example because it's like, it's not like they're not talented.
Yeah, hardware's
clearly hardware, and it's like that is the perfect example of just how hard hardware is, even in a hyper controlled environment where no lives are on the line.
Yeah.
And then you go into a situation, that you're dealing with Brink all the time, where like you need this stuff needs to work because first responders are relying on it. The 911 operators are relying on it. So much is kind of riding on it. So I'm curious how you think about sort of battle testing products internally, and at what point you feel like they're ready to be deployed in the field.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the reality is it's just incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I mean, in the very early days of Brink, when I was riding along with the SWAT team, I might have just faced like countless issues. Mm-hmm. A large portion of this happened during Las Vegas's summer. So like overheating was a theme in the first couple of months. The RF environments where you're trying to operate drones can, in some cases, be incredibly congested, especially in ISM bands. Think about like an apartment complex, right? Yeah. Like every apartment has its own Wi-Fi transmission system, and you're trying to share, spectrum with all of that, which is terrible. In some cases, public safety radios will blow out your communications. So you have to be aware of that and sort of like integrate with all of the other radios that a SWAT team might already be utilizing. And then everyone wants pilot assistance on these drones and obstacle avoidance. Mm-hmm. But many of the techniques that you would normally want to employ in order to give a drone indoor localization are sensitive to environmental factors, like visual inertial odometry utilizing an HD image sensor, right? Like maybe that works super well when you're not blowing up shitloads of dust all the time in an attic, right? Yeah. Or maybe it works well in like a well-lit room, but you start kicking up insulation in zero light conditions, and like good luck making that function. So what you ultimately have to invest in is large numbers of redundant systems, right? Localizing based on LiDAR data and IMU data and VIO data and GPS data, et cetera, barometer data, et cetera. And then if you layer enough systems and you're clever enough in your system design and software design and everything else, you can get to something that works. But I mean, this is what makes all of this hard, right? Yeah. Like putting together a quick demo of a product that competes with us, that's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Something that actually does better than what we make in the field is extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, and it's funny because I imagine that there's companies that have or will try to compete with you that fly a DJI drone, and they're like, oh, I could
This
make
is
an
easy.
American version
Yeah,
of
yeah,
this
yeah,
that you
yeah.
could fly in a
Not
house,
quite.
and then
they make it look so easy.
Totally.
DJI, I mean, DJI is an extraordinary company.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was really amazing to spend some time within their org.
Can you break down
just
some of
they
the?
make it look easy. But
Can you break down some of the design trade-offs from what people might have experienced with the DJI quadcopter? I think about like 20-minute battery life being kind of the upper bound, but I've heard about drones, being gas powered, being single rotor. There's so many different trade-offs. Octocopters, there's all sorts of different, what Zipline's doing. We talked to the Zipline folks yesterday. It's a completely different system. So what trade-offs have you made to move your product away from what people might be familiar with like a DJI Mavic 3 or something like that?
Totally. Well, the first thing I would say is DJI is actively getting banned throughout the United States.
Yeah.
So on the order of 10 states have already passed laws preventing their public safety agencies from utilizing Chinese drones.
Yep.
DJI drones are Chinese, Autel drones are Chinese.
Yep.
DJI has something like 90% of the global market, Autel is roughly 5%.
Wow.
So like 95% of the market
is banned.
is controlled by companies that can't sell into public safety agencies in 10 states, which definitely is generating a significant need for more drone makers in the free world, right? There's also potentially some federal legislation coming that would have a similar effect on all 50 states.
Sure.
Since it's go for it. Sorry.
Yeah, but no, I mean, if we're looking at the actual products,
yeah, that's what I want to know.
Lemur 2 competes most directly with DJI Avata, but we invented a whole bunch of features that make Lemur 2 very fit for purpose for a SWAT mission. Things like a glass breaking attachment. So the drone can actually make its own hole into a structure and make entry, because it is fairly dangerous for SWAT operators to go up, rake and break a window when there's a person with like a rifle inside. No one wants to do that.
Yeah.
So our customers care a lot about that feature. Lemur 2 has a two-way audio system. So when our drone finds someone, it can actually be used to communicate with them, which is usually the number one goal besides getting someone out of a structure during a SWAT call out. Like, you want to establish negotiation and a line of communication. If you do that, the risk of something going terribly wrong goes down tremendously. So it's a pretty common tactic. Our drones have thermal imagers. Our indoor drone has a thermal imager. DJI does not offer an indoor system with a thermal imager that can see heat, which is unbelievably beneficial on basically every mission. I could go on and on and on. We've invented a million features along these lines.
What about
how do you think about supply chains? Obviously, I'm sure it's top of mind this week. How are you thinking about it? How are you adapting, Brink? I'm sure you've been trying to become independent from China.
But it takes time.
We are.
Reasons, but it's super hard.
I've been personally sanctioned by China. I cannot enter China. Brink has now been sanctioned by China twice.
Okay.
So we're not allowed to buy any parts from China.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
How are you dealing with that? I feel like we just heard a story about Skydio not being able to get batteries.
Isn't it hilariously ironic that we can't pass federal legislation to ban DJI, which owns 90% of our market, yet they're banning
you, and you don't even sell there.
Our team, yeah, it's insane.
Right? I mean,
same old story though. Same old story, right? Like all of their social media platforms can come into our market and compete, but we can't go into theirs. Yeah. The exact same dynamic is now unfolding in the drone industry. It's ridiculous.
So supply chain. Like, how are you thinking about it? Because it feels like just, even if you're fully aligned with Made in America, it's hard to get a reliable source of batteries in America. And we just saw that story with Skydio having their battery manufacturer get pulled kind of out from under them.
Well, our drones are NDA compliant, meaning that we don't utilize any electronics from China whatsoever. No processors, no radios, no imaging sensors, like none of that stuff.
Yep.
We had to become NDA compliant a couple of years ago in order to sell to the customers that we sell. Sure. So that was like a great step one.
Got it.
Listen, I mean, you have to set this as like an initial design requirement. Like, engineering team, we can't use parts from China.
Yeah.
Can't do it.
Yep.
And if that's a part of the original brief, then people find solutions.
Sure.
Yeah.
They work with new suppliers, they in-house stuff, like whatever's necessary, they do it, and you end up with a product. I think what's excruciating is building something without that initial requirement set and then having to like transition it over. That seems really like really bad. But we've not been in a position where we've had to do that because of NDA compliance requirements and other things. We saw this one coming.
Yeah.
So it
Is
isn't
there-
affecting this very much.
Do you think there's an adequate investment in the domestic drone design and manufacturing today, or do we need to 10x?
No, I think it's off by like a factor of 100. It's actively terrifying, actually.
Wow.
We have no drone industrial capacity. I think the DoD continues to underinvest in small drones. They're only now beginning to realize that these things are important weapons of war because of the conflict in Ukraine, but they're not writing checks. I mean, the largest military small drone purchase that I'm aware of is SRR. And it's just not very big. It's like, I think, single digit thousands of systems. Those are the orders that have been placed so far. So when we're buying a couple thousand drones at a time and DJI is producing literally millions a year, it's not a good situation for America for the future.
How do you think about focus in that context? Because in my view, if we need more investment, one of the ways to do that would be you launch a DoD focused side of the business, or you start to work, with foreign allies and stuff like that. But clearly, you've made a decision in the fullness of time to sort of focus on the local market. But I'm sure you have pressure all the time. I'm sure you have investors that like send you an article about Ukraine, and they're like, "Hey, Blake, did you see what's happening in Ukraine?" And you have to be like, "Yes, I saw, but we have our own sort of battles at home."
Listen, if military customers aren't buying drones, that's not a decision I can make.
Yeah. Fascinating.
What about in the supply
I should also
chain?
say, though, just to be clear, like I absolutely adore the public safety market. Like I started this company to serve first responders. I think the life-saving mission that they take on is extraordinary, and it's something that I'm deeply passionate about and excited to support. So like that's what I care about here. But I mean, I'm not blind to what's going on in China or Ukraine, and it's clear that systems very similar to the ones that we build will shape future conflict.
I'm interested in, and again, maybe getting a little bit out of scope here, but I'm interested. There's this classic idea of like, U.S. Marine training with some type of like AR-based rifle, and they spend all this time training on this sort of rifle. Are they spending enough time training how to fly FPV drones, how to work with drone networks, or do you think the training is not even sort of caught up to the realities of the battlefield today?
Well, FPV drones are really hard to fly. I don't know. Have either of you guys tried to fly like an FPV system before?
Yeah, it's really hard.
I've just done basic DJI type.
They're not stabilized. Like they don't have GPS. So if you take your hands off the sticks, FPV drones will fly into a wall at like 40 miles an hour. It takes incredible skill to like even keep them in a hover, like let alone hit some moving target somewhere. They've been highly successful in Ukraine, but I don't feel like FPV drones, as they're currently designed or manufactured, are really like the end state of this technology. I think they'll be more automated.
Yeah.
They'll have stabilization systems. You'll be able to select a target and the drone will do its own navigation to intercept that target. They won't rely necessarily on RF communication systems since the jamming environment is getting so bad in many places. So that's all to say, like, you can say, okay, we should be training our military on how to fly FPVs, but like that's going to be a huge amount of work, and all of that work might not be very relevant in 5 years when some of the technologies that I described or capabilities I described mature to the point that they're commonplace. Yeah. So I don't know. I think really the right choice would be invest a lot more in purchasing drones, actually buy.
Oh. Hey, Zach. We're flipping people over. We have some technical difficulties in the studio today, but
no worries.
We'll be with you in just a minute, Zach. We got to say goodbye to Blake.
No, I guess just to finish my last statement.
Sorry.
I think the move here is for the U.S. military to buy drones at significant scale, start incorporating them into our armed forces, get people familiar with them, but have drone manufacturers like us or anyone else like build something that's actually fit for purpose. So, all of those efforts result in a good outcome for all parties involved.
That makes sense.
Well, this has been fascinating. We'd
Yeah.
love to have you back again soon.
Yeah.
And thank you for the work that you're doing, and congrats to you and the team on the new milestone.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
There we
Really
go.
appreciate it.
Massive round.
Cheers, Blake.
Yeah.
Have a
Cheers.
good one.
Talk to you soon.